The Zone of Interest. As a cinephile, it's a film that you got to see, but yeah, what do we think of it? Well, you'll just have to wait and see what we say. We're watching after the Oscars as well, so it won the best foreign language film. It won a lot of BAFTAs, I think. It is a film about the mundanities of family life and career progression in a somewhat beautiful bucolic setting with two characters who, oddly, it turns out they met at horticultural school, you know, in some sort of like progressive green school. The twist in it is that this family lives against the wall in Auschwitz, and the main character's career that he's progressing in is that he's the commandant of that camp. So it follows a Nazi family and their Nazi mother-in-law, I guess, or German mother-in-law anyway, existing and trying to have a lovely life outside the walls of Auschwitz. And it's kind of like two films going on in parallel. We have that film, and then we have, just through sound, all the horrors of the camp. It's a film where the horrors are going on in the periphery. And by doing that, it is absolutely harrowing and as horrific as if you could see what's going on at some points, I thought. But Martin, tell me about your watching experience. When did you see it? Was it in the cinema? Did you catch it just after?
I think around the same time, me and my girlfriend Maria went to watch it in the lovely Bio Aspen in Stockholm, and I didn't know anything about what it was about. I had a vague idea of something World War II, but that was basically the only thing I knew about the film. I deliberately kept myself in the dark. So I got there is a thing maybe we should say that we're gonna wait with spoilers, but there's not so much to spoil in this movie. The concept of the movie is, I guess, the only spoiler in itself, and maybe the ending we will wait with. But if you want to go in,
I would say the ending is a spoiler. Actually, there's one big thing that happens.
Yeah, we'll wait with that until the very end. But other than that, I think we're just gonna talk about everything. And so if you want to go in kind of blind, you should watch the movie before you listen to this. And I think, but having said that, the concept, it really, struck a nerve with me. There's a scene very early on where, you figure out quickly that it's about a Nazi family, and Rudolf Höss, I think is his name, the father. He comes back from work and he takes his boots off, and he's talking and casually with his family, and they go inside, and then from around the wall a little boy comes running, and he's not dressed. He's dressed like he's a servant, but it feels like he's probably from the camp or something, and he comes running.
I think he's Polish. I think it's a German family who have moved to Poland, and the Poles are treated as very much second-class citizens, but not as bad as the Jews in the camp. I could be wrong about that, but I think usually, I know that there is kind of people who are doing work for the family, and they are Poles, seen as kind of serfs, and their lives are very precarious, as you see in the film,
And he,
but not quite as horrific as those in the camp.
Yeah, of course. And he comes running around the corner, and he takes the boots really quickly, he's on a clock, and he takes the boots and he runs around the corner to a little water station, and he starts washing the blood off the boots. And then you start realizing that there's something sinister going on, or that's when I realized, I think. And then it goes on, and then you quickly realize that oh shit, just on the other side of the wall of the family, there's smoke clouds billowing up, and screams of pain and torture.
Yeah, I do remember the start being interesting and very slow. I mean, the whole film is very slow.
Yeah.
Because it's done in a very naturalistic way, at very long scenes. Do you remember at the very start there's a very long scene in nature where they're just having a picnic? I think it starts with a picnic, which there's, obviously an irony to that, in that, it's something that we see as being, a lovely family activity. And I've heard this just described in some places as he probably is a loving father to his kids. What makes it completely compelling is all these ordinary things in life, subtly or not so subtly, interrupted by the Holocaust. I mean, so you've talked about it now, like him taking his shoes off, and then they've got to get the blood washed off them, you know? And then he's taking his kids fishing, and he accidentally steps on a human jawbone that's made its way into the river.
But that scene, it's even worse. It's even worse, that scene, because it comes quite, like, there is scenes before that where they're like, you know, they're out riding their horses, and then like they pass like all these prisoners being led on a line, and they're just like riding along next to it. But that scene is like when they're out and they're having like father-son time, his sons, right? And they're like, and he's like wading in the river, and then he picks up that jawbone, and then you realize that like, oh, they're just like pushing out all the carcass, the dead bodies and the soot and everything into the river, and he's just like, oh, we gotta get out of the water, we gotta get out of the water. And then you cut to him standing over the sink, like just blowing black snot out of his nose. It's so horrific. Like,
oh yeah, yeah. And you do feel like there's something about that where it's like the evil of it is seeping into everything. Like in such mundane ways of like, they've got to take the washing in at night because they know it's going to get covered in ash, you know? Like, yeah, like and always there's like you said about the billowing smoke, but I remember a beautifully composed shot where they're walking in the garden, and in the background is the train coming in.
What the movie does so well is that it doesn't show you, and so when another movie would have been like, oh, look at how horrific it was for the people in the camps, and how they were, you know, tortured and murdered, and like pushes it into your face, and then you're like, I don't want to look at that because I can't relate to it, and I can't even grasp how horrific this is. So I'm just like, oh, and like I don't feel it in the same way. I just feel like it's pushing the horrors on me, and here I could relate so much to it because, you know, in a way this is the life we're all living, where you're like, you've got on the other side of the wall, you got the horrors of the world, and you are living in your privilege, and you're trying to ignore it as much as you can, because you can't do, or in their case they can do something about it because they're actually actively causing it, but you know, like, you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, well, well, that's the difference. I mean, and it's such an interesting difference. I mean, like, in slightly humanizing the Nazis, showing their family life, the irony is, I thought it dehumanizes us, you know, like, because it shows, you know, what they're willing to put up with, and it makes you wonder what you're willing to put up with. The main female character in it, Sandra Hüller, who, you know, in sometimes is just playing a normal motherly figure with her own life going on, and trying to like kind of show off to her own mum, and like, you know, she wants her mum to be proud of her, like where they've got to. But then obviously she's a complete demon, you know, because instead of like going towards this and trying to help, she's not even closing her eyes to it. She's relishing in it. They're all trying on all these dresses and bits of jewellery from the Jews in the camp, you know. And I suppose what you're saying about like it doesn't show you it directly, like I think that only works because the audience knows a lot of what's happened in concentration camps due to other films and other media. Like, as in, like, you know, I've read books on it, like, we've been to, like, museums about it and things. So when you do hear the stuff going on, and it's, like, such a detailed soundscape going on in the background, and always in the background, like, relentlessly so, like, in a horrible way, your brain does fill in the gaps, I think. And there's one scene where he trots out into the camp on a horse, and it never shows you the camp, so on that bit it only shows you him from the waist up on the horse, just looking and watching, overseeing, and then I think you see the smoke in the background, and you hear an altercation happening around him, like where people are maybe going to get killed or people are getting mistreated, and screams, and it is almost walk out the cinema, I thought, you know, like I thought it was like so upsetting, and like even upsetting to talk about now, actually. Like that was like the worst of any concentration camp stuff I've ever seen, and you don't even see anything, it's just sound, and then they just stop it just before it's too much, you know. I thought
there's also the kids who are not so, you know, actively involved, but they're just part of the system, and they're passively you know, guilty, or however you say, like of living.
Well, they're also just kids, so I don't even know if they are guilty.
But like
I mean, they're-
passively, like they're getting the benefits of their parents'
Yeah,
crimes,
totally.
and I feel like that is what you can relate to being, in a system where you are passively benefiting from the horrors of the world. And that's the thing, the scene where like the boy he's playing with his little cars, or even his soldiers, I think, and he's playing around, and then he starts hearing like calls, like voices from outside, and he gets up and he goes over to the window and he hears them like drowning a prisoner in the river, and like horrifically you just hear the sounds of this prisoner being drowned, and then he goes back to playing with his little toy. They just linger on him standing there listening for a bit, and then he's like goes back and pew pew pew, and that's the way you feel when you're like you're going about your life and doing your fun stuff, and then you're on Instagram and you're like, oh, okay, mass graves of children found in Gaza, and then you go back to your life of privilege and you try to not think about it too much.
That is so true about the Instagram thing. I mean, yeah, you couldn't be more right about that.
Or you scroll past and you try to find another funny video with cats, and that's what it made me think about. This whole film made me think about how we're living on another side of this wall, and like trying to find funny cat videos, but being interrupted by the screams of people dying because of our privilege. Sorry for bumming you out.
No, it's so true. It's, of course, and that's the sort of things that the filmmaker wants you to be thinking of,
Yeah,
because it is an exploration. I do think it's also an exploration of this awful thing that has happened, in history, like almost uniquely horrible, like it, just in the scale of it. But also, it does ask you, like, okay, so what is your zone of interest? Like, what are you blocking out? Like. What are you paying attention to and not paying attention to? And it's all about attention, isn't it? And it has such an unusual start, the film, where it's just a blank screen and a really abstract noisescape. And who knows what it is. But to me, and it's probably deliberately vague, to me it's saying, like, don't just watch, listen. Like,
right.
The story is happening behind what we're pretending to show you. You know what I mean? I listened to an interview with the director, and he was talking about how he did want to put one ray of light into this, and that is, ironically, it's not shot in the light, it's shot like with negative images and during the dark, and that is a true story. And how lovely. I mean, this is a true story as well. It's based on a book about the real commandant.
Rudolf Hess, yeah.
Okay. But the true story was that there's this, and this isn't a spoiler, there's a little girl who is one of the Poles that lives with the family, so kind of like a servant. But during the night, she cycles out and she plants food. She plants apples for the prisoners to find. And that is the antithesis of what you're saying about, like, well, look, like, all we do is scroll on. There are things that we can do, whether we do them or not, is the problem, And you just really hope that you would be that brave little girl who is putting herself at risk going into the camp to do this thing. And it's not like we get to see people enjoying the apples or anything. It's like so subtle, Yeah, and the film is subtle to the point of being unquestionably, if you're just watching it as a straightforward film, boring. Maybe. I mean, is that fair to say? I was never bored, but the pace is like violently slow.
I mean, yeah, if it doesn't interest you, or if you're not like catching on to anything, maybe. But I felt like every scene had a purpose, and every scene was showing something interesting, and I didn't feel like it was stagnating at any point. I
agree. I just think it asks for our patience is all I mean, maybe. Totally. Like, it's not got an entertaining pace. I guess. Yeah. But I mean, wow, like I really found it super affecting. I mean, now we're coming to the part of the review, I guess, where we're talking about what we think, and we've probably been giving it away as we go, but like, I mean, like, this is a amazing film, I thought, amazingly challenging, and it really causes some introspection in a good way, I think.
Totally. No, and I want to emphasize that, it's not a boring film at all. Like, it's extremely gripping in a very subtle way. Through the magic of podcasting, or through the magic of us being very late with recording this since seeing it, I've just written the music, Choir of Lament, Tormented Voices, but I don't remember what I mean by that.
So It's by Mika Levy, who does my favourite scores. Yeah, they're amazing. But there's very little of it. Apparently there was a big score, and then they just decided to pare it right down. And there's just a couple of like almost like trippy moments where it's like going close in on a rose, and it's like or something. I actually can't remember what it sounds like, which is so frustrating. I think it's like an industrial noise.
Okay, yeah. I think at some point there must have been a choir of tortured voices or tormented voices. It might have been a very brief moment, but I wrote it down, so it must be there. I think this is us showing our hands at how unprofessional film reviewers we are. I think there's a score with voices tormented.
I know what you mean, but I think maybe you're writing that it is scored by that throughout the film.
Speaking of the rose, I've also written roses, screams, sudden red frame, then movie continues. And I was gonna ask you what do I mean by that? But I think it was like there is a picture of roses and that there is screams in the music, or maybe it's the screams from the.
I think it screams from the camp, and the whole like the rose is red or the rose is blue or whatever, but then it goes completely red, and the whole screen goes red. And you're right, and then it's just like blank red, and it's almost like a flickering effect.
Yeah.
And what the hell are they trying to go for there? I have no idea. You know, I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
But I mean,
well, if you see the movie, or if you remember the movie better than us, then let us know if if there was any screaming voices in the music.
I tell you what I found challenging is this is a family who are super into nature, you know, and they like, as I was saying, like they like studied that sort of stuff, because sometimes I think like, oh, you know, I can't be bothered with my things that are going on in my world, like, you know, to do with like my work and things like that. And also I can't be bothered with I can't be bothered. Well, this is actually maybe how I feel, and it's not a good way to feel, but like, you know, there's a lot of like stuff going on in the world, and a nice way to escape that is going into the natural world, and I'm a bit of a nature nerd. I found it quite challenging to see, well, you know, the Nazis are doing that too. The way that they're using their recreational time is going on picnics, going on like fishing trips, and they're paying attention to the bird noises, and like there's a lot of like attention to the sounds of nature as well, and even in a way that isn't so challenging for me and you, Martin, like, you know, like selective like zone of interest and selective empathy. This guy loves his horse. He loves it, like the way he loves his horse more than he loves his wife, but he certainly loves his horse more than he cares for these 6 million people that he's in charge of killing, you know, like, and you really do see him be. It's interesting that we haven't really talked much about the characters, because the characters, it's not really about that, is it? Like, the characters don't give you that much to go on, apart from that they're not empathetic, you know, apart from to their horses.
Yeah. Like,
in a way that we might be, you know, it's a very conservative ideology to like, you know, I care a lot about my family unit, don't care that much about what's happening outside it.
The grandmother, I feel like, is gets a little bit more, and it's only because she's one of the only characters who seem to voice any kind of opinion, even that opinion is not very, you don't show it so much. But the mother of the wife in the family comes to visit, and she's going around and she's showing her mother the garden, and very proudly like talking about everything she's doing with the garden, and as they're walking around, you see the camp wall in the background and the smoke billowing and the sound, some screams and shouts and stuff. And there's a really interesting discussion they have where the mother is like, casually talking about that she missed out on some curtains that she really wanted when her neighbor was taken away. And like, so the neighbor's stuff had been the neighbor had been taken away to a camp probably, and her stuff had been auctioned away to everyone, and she was like disappointed that she didn't get the curtains that she really liked, and I think her name is Silberman, the neighbor. And then a little bit later they're standing, and so they're like, oh, so the camp is right there on the other side of the walls. Well, yeah. Oh, maybe Silberman is there.
Yeah.
The wife says
Horrific.
Very casually, and then she keeps looking at and you see the mother stop, and she's a little bit like, and then she goes on, and then later in the night the mother wakes up and she's just looking out at this, the grandmother looking out at this smoke billowing, and then she just leaves.
Oh yeah, fucked up. And then there's we'll talk about it in spoilers actually.
Let's get into spoilers. there's not so
Yes.
much to spoil in this movie, but you know.
Well, let's give our numbers out of 10. Is that something we do? I can't remember. I think it is.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, that's something we do. It's
Okay, yeah. Let's do that. And
it's
then
a staple
we'll go to spoilers.
Scot and the Swede.
Yes, nice. Martin, what's your number, mate?
You know, if it's not a 9, it's a 10. You know, but I'm not sure if this is a movie that I think it deserves a 10, but I think according to my ranking system, I wouldn't like put this on my like favorite movies in the world, and it's mostly because of, you know, the kind of movie it is. So it probably deserves a 10, but I'm gonna give it a 9.
We're in complete agreement. Yeah, I agree with every element of that sentiment. You know, like certainly not gonna, you know, to say favorite would be misleading, but like it does, like for the intent like of what they tried to do, they totally achieved it, and I found it so moving. You know, so that's awesome. I suppose maybe there's elements of vagary in the last act that we're going to talk about in the spoilers that are super powerful, but like not 100% sure what they're going for at some elements of it. Like, there are actually elements of it where if you don't completely get what's going on, and I think I was like that in the last act at some bits. The elements of that where if you don't quite get what's going on, it is slow, like, and maybe a tiny bit boring, like when they're away from the camp, a tiny bit.
Okay, yeah. Well, let's get into it. Let's get into the spoilers and talk about it,
Let's do it.
Clearly. Spoilers from here. Watch Zone of Interest. Spoilers. So what you're talking about is when he goes to Berlin or somewhere, and he attends some kind of meeting with a bunch of different the heads of the Holocaust, I guess. And like a mid-management meeting where they discuss how can we kill more Jews is what they're talking about, but
in a completely bureaucratic way, in a way that sounds like they're talking about maybe like the manufacturing of a incredibly boring element in an engine. You know what I mean? Exactly. Yeah, and that is super interesting. But I see what you mean with like those scenes were a bit long, and it's very like following some guy at the boring office job, and that's the intention, and that's the point of it. That like, you know, for him it's just a boring office job, but what they're discussing is actually like how can we increase production of death. And they're talking about units, I think. So they say like, okay, you can dispose of like 200,000 units here, and the units we know are lives. Yeah, and it's horrific, and it's like and then while this one goes off, and then while that's cooling down, then this one goes off, and you know they're just talking about killing hundreds and hundreds of people at a time, and how to do that in the fastest way to dispose of as many lives as possible. Yeah, it's really fucking grim. Yeah. And intentionally banal, I guess. Yeah. You know, like, because it's certainly not like, they don't want to show it as, I mean, it is utterly evil, but they don't want to show the characters as knowingly evil at that point. You know? And then the big thing happens with the main character. Suddenly we cut to modern day Auschwitz. Like, and for some reason we focus on the people who, and it's not a diss, and it's whatever they do is so impactful. The really impactful thing, you see all the shoes of the people who have died, and like, you know, the whole cinema, people are crying, definitely me. Like, but then also it focuses so much on the people who are keeping the place clean, like the people who are like spraying and washing and wiping and hoovering in modern day Auschwitz. Like, and what's the point there? Why are they doing that? I don't know why he does that. Fair, you know, like, so he's walking down the stairs, and then something grabs his attention, and and he's in the 40s, and he's is he retching before or after? Before, right? He does after. A retch on the stairs, and it's the first time we see any sort of emotion from him about what's happening, right. And we don't even know if it's about that, but suddenly he retches on the stairs. It's after, right? First he's walking down the stairs, and then something grabs his attention, and he's looking down a hallway. I think he retches before. I think he retches before. But I could be wrong. And that reminded me of, have you ever seen the documentary The Act of Killing? No, I haven't. Okay, right. Tiny bit of a spoiler for The Act of Killing, but that's about a true story where the filmmakers confront someone who engaged in a genocide in Indonesia, and they get him to reenact his crimes because he doesn't see them as crimes. And then at the very end of the film, in real life, the one time where you see him have any sort of emotional reaction to what he did, because he never admits anything, is they're talking about it or they see something, and suddenly he just goes, ugh, and he just has these horrific retching fits, you know, and he doesn't know why he's having it, and it's so interesting. Like,
oh, shit.
And that film I did find too slow, and I watched when I was a lot younger, so I just didn't get it, you know. But I remember that being powerful, and that's his only guilty reaction. And then they do the same here.
They must have been inspired, right?
Maybe, or inspired by what really happens, you know.
Yeah. He's been at a party with a bunch of people, and he's just looking across the room, and then he calls his wife and he tells, like, I'm looking out across this room of everyone, and all I can think about is how to kill them the fastest, how to kill them the most efficiently. And he's just so cold about it, and it's just like, you know, it's like I don't know what to call it in English, but in Swedish it's like arbetsskadad, when you're like, you do something for work and then that it like has broken you. So like, you know, a casual example would be if you're like having a conversation, someone's telling you something really important or traumatic, and then you're like, oh shit, this would have been a good scene in a movie if I could film this. Right. Oh, what did you say? Your dog died. Oh, yeah, sorry. I was, you know, when you're like, you start thinking about your work when you shouldn't be, you know, everything becomes about work. Yes. And for him, it's like he's at this big party and it's just, he can't enjoy it because he's just thinking about how to most efficiently kill everyone, which is his job. And then he's walking down the stairway and he suddenly stops and like starts retching in the stairway. And then he looks through this corridor and he sees, and it's like a hole, and he sees, and it suddenly becomes quite surreal. He sees through this hole, and suddenly we cut to present day Auschwitz, where they're cleaning the museum, basically.
So are we then looking at their act of cleaning as like almost like their reverence over? It's how much we're being sure to remember his crime. Like, I remember thinking, like, if it doesn't cut back to him, I'm not sure if he's even seeing this. And I'm finding it quite challenging because you really want him to face the horror of what he's doing, you know?
Yeah.
And I was worried that you see him looking down a corridor and then it cuts to modern day and then the film ends. But I was so glad that it cut back to him. And you feel like maybe he's seen the horror, you know? Like, I was so glad to see he at least got a glimpse of the horror. Because I suppose otherwise you're also thinking like, well, what if he dies without seeing any justice? If he has an idea of the horror, then at least there is that slight justice.
Yeah, and there is something about that wasn't my favorite part of the movie, I think. And it is because I really liked the retching, and I liked that he looked into the future, or did he or didn't he? But like it seemed like he did. But just the scenes from Auschwitz, and like I didn't really get why they were showing the cleaning staff cleaning Auschwitz, and I felt a little bit like it broke the tone or something of the film, where I felt like it became a bit documentarian in a way that I felt, and I don't know, my girlfriend, who is a documentary filmmaker, completely disagreed with me about this, but
me too.
I really felt like,
as in, I love that hybrid. Like I love that it did that. I think, you know. But
okay, yeah. No, I just felt like there was a sense for me that these people cleaning was the real cleaning staff, and that I felt like there was a little bit of we're being filmed right now. This is a little bit interesting day of work. Or something, like it felt a bit staged in a way that I didn't feel about the actually staged parts of the, and I felt a bit confused about like seeing the museum of it, and I don't know, maybe it is. I also have a hard time when I've been at a museum like that. I think it's really horrific, but looking at the shoes through a plexiglass, that was not the strongest feeling I ever got from a museum from World War II. Like
right.
There's something about it that doesn't move me as much as the rest of the movie did. it just feels a little bit like, oh, it's a museum of Auschwitz, you know. And maybe that's the point. Maybe there's something about that too, that there's like, and now it's a tourist attraction. People go there to look at this. But you were talking about immersion before, and that maybe pulled me out of immersion a little bit from this world that they built in 40s Germany and Austria, and suddenly it was modern day, and it pulled me out of immersion a bit, only to throw me back into it. But yeah,
for a second though. I think we go back to him for a second and then it's done.
And
the film is done. You know, like. But I'm just so glad we saw him again. There was something unusual about this film, Mårten. There's a sequence where maybe I'm just having an absolute moment to myself, where I think the filmmaker is trying to do something, and I don't know if this is right. So there's a point where the boy, you see that they're cold. The two boys are playing. This is when the dad is away at the conference. His two sons are playing. One of them's going a bit mean, and they're talking about how cold they are. One of them goes into the greenhouse, and the other one locks his brother in the greenhouse, you know, and then leaves him.
Yeah.
And it's not resolved. And I wondered, at that point, for me, I'm thinking, right, this boy has picked up on some of the evil that his dad's done. The other boy's going to freeze to death. You know?
Okay.
Like, I know, but why am I thinking that? Total mad. Like, maybe my brain is like overstimulated at this point, you know. There's a famous Dostoevsky novel where he talks about a girl who's locked in a outhouse overnight, and it's cold in Russia, and she freezes to death. So maybe that was a bit in my head, and I was thinking, no, like that's going to happen here. And then it doesn't show you what happens with them, so that I thought the filmmaker is maybe saying, well, why should you care about what happens to this one child? Because over the wall, hundreds of thousands of people are dying. So wake up to what you're seeing. You followed this family and you're worried about this boy. Are you as worried about all these voices over the wall? You know.
To me, I think that's an interesting take, but I was just thinking that, you know, the boy like was playing, and that sort of mirrors what their dad does for work, and that he's playing like his father did, and he's locking his brother up, and that probably off screen their mother was gonna find it and let him out.
Yeah,
but
fair, totally fair. Yeah, I mean that's what my girlfriend said as well.
Okay.
I think she was like, well, I just thought he was being a bit like the dad, you know, like and she was like, I did not get that at all. And I was like, oh well, you know, like maybe you're just not getting it, but maybe I just made it up. I think I am probably. I've never heard anyone else say anything about that, so who knows? Like, but I did think it was interesting. A connection to an old film that we reviewed, Mårten, Easy A. I remember you saying that was written in about 10 days or 4 days or something.
Mm-hmm.
This film's been in development for 10 years.
Really?
The filmmaker hasn't made any other film since Under the Skin. I've been working on this, so there's going to be so much there that we haven't noticed, and there's so much thought gone into it and a lot of reverence. Last thing that we didn't talk about, Sandra Hula, so she has the only real evil baddie moment in it, like, because of course everything they're doing is bad, but like the bit where she really shows her colours and she shows herself to be such a like ugly character, when she says to the girl, she's been so solipsistic. The woman who works for her, the young girl, has set up breakfast for her and her mother. And she says, have you done this to hurt me because you know the mother's left?
Mm.
And then she says, you know my husband could have your ashes scattered over the battlefield.
Right.
This time tomorrow or something.
Right, yeah.
And it's just like, oh. It's the first time they embrace the power and the cruelty of it.
Yeah.
I think. Even just that one line puts her up there with some of like the most evil of evil baddies in cinema history, or the past few years anyway.
Yeah.
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 What did you think of the acting, Mårten?
That's good. It wasn't on my mind. I was completely immersed. I was just,
good.
living it. So I thought it was brilliant. Yeah. I think it ends on. There was the scene we talked about a bit earlier where she's planting apples, and she also finds this note hidden for her, and she goes home, and I think it's musical notes, right? And she plays this is the Polish girl who is helping the prisoners, and I think she plays the music notes, and then you hear the poem written to the music notes over it, and it's a poem about hope written by one of the prisoners in the camp, and it's really
Wow.
beautiful poem. That's a real poem that they actually did find, I think.
Hey, I'm Josh the Scot.
And I'm Mårten the Swede, and this is an excerpt from our film review podcast called The Scot.
And the Swede, where every episode we review a new film and an old film, somewhat related, and then do another shorter recommend of a Scottish film.
And a Swedish film. So yeah, if you want to listen to the whole episodes, you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and any podcasts streamer of your choice.